Welcome to Crushed Husband. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. My phone buzzed for the fourth time. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand as I pedaled hard up the final stretch of the dirt trail. My legs burned, my muscles aching from the 4 days of grueling mountain biking through the rocky paths in the hills. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the cool breeze that cut through the trees. Jonah, my old friend, was ahead of me, his red bike's rear tire kicking up dust as he laughed, a typical grin plastered on his face. "You slowing down, old man?" Jonah shouted over his shoulder, the teasing in his voice as familiar as it had been since high school. I grinned, giving a tired but good-natured response. "I'm just getting warmed up." Jonah snorted but didn't look back. His pace was faster than mine, but after 4 days of pushing through narrow trails, steep climbs, and endless downhill sprints, my body was starting to rebel. Still, the trip had been exactly what I needed, a chance to break free of the daily grind, to breathe without the weight of deadlines and work pulling at me. We had been friends since we were kids. He was the type of guy who was always laughing, always moving, and I had my steady life waiting back at home, a steady job as a construction supervisor, a 17-year marriage to Evelyn, and a daughter, Sophie, who was about to turn 16. The world I had created was simple, predictable, and that's exactly how I liked it. The town of Pine Haven was on the horizon now, its weathered streets, its quiet charm. Nothing had really changed, and I liked it that way. The town's familiarity comforted me. Jonah was still ahead, his voice carrying back to me. "Next year, I'm thinking we head to the Rockies, dude. You in?" I took a deep breath, relishing the feeling of the cool air. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing full well that my routine and responsibilities would likely keep me in Pine Haven. Still, I smiled. There was a part of me that longed for more trips like this, where the only thing that mattered was the ride and nothing else. My phone buzzed again. I fished it out of my pocket and saw the screen light up with notifications. 3 missed calls from Evelyn, and 1 from an unknown number. I frowned. Missing calls from Evelyn wasn't unusual. She had a way of calling me about everything and nothing at all. But something in my gut twisted at the sight of the unknown number. I turned off my bike, pulling it to the side of the trail, leaning it against a tree. Jonah slowed down as he caught up with me, his curious gaze flicking to the screen in my hand. "You good?" he asked. I didn't answer at first. Something wasn't right. I pressed the call button and brought the phone to my ear. A woman's voice greeted me immediately. "Mr. Brandt?" she asked, her tone sharp and professional. "Yeah, this is Marcus Brandt." "Who is this?" "This is Nurse Davis at Pine Haven General Hospital. We have your daughter Sophie here. She's been admitted to the emergency room. She's unconscious but stable." A cold chill crept up my spine. "What happened?" My voice cracked more than I intended. "We're still assessing her, sir, but we need you to come down here as soon as possible. She's been brought in with injuries that appear to be more than an accident. I'm afraid we don't have all the details yet, but please get here as quickly as you can." The air around me went still. My hands shook slightly as I lowered the phone from my ear. Jonah, now beside me, must have noticed the look on my face. "Marcus?" he asked, his voice low. "What's going on?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Sophie's in the hospital, unconscious. They said it might not be an accident." Jonah's expression went from confusion to concern. "Shit. Man, let's go." "Right now?" I nodded. I didn't need any more convincing. Every part of me was already heading for Pine Haven General, but I still couldn't process the words the nurse had said. Something wasn't right. Jonah gave me a final look, a silent promise that he'd stick by my side no matter what happened. And then we were off. The ride back to town, feeling like the longest stretch of road I'd ever traveled. I barely remembered the drive. Jonah's truck had barely come to a stop outside Pine Haven General Hospital before I was already opening the door. My legs were stiff, my mind racing, but all that mattered was getting to Sophie. Jonah was right behind me, his presence a quiet comfort I didn't realize I needed. We hurried through the glass doors, the sterile scent of disinfectant hitting me like a punch to the face. My heart hammered in my chest, the ticking of the clock on the wall almost mocking the urgency in my veins. "Where's Sophie Brandt?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly as I approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, glanced at the computer screen and then back at me. "Room 307, Mr. Brandt, just down the hall to your left." I didn't say anything else. Jonah's footsteps echoed in time with mine as we rushed down the hallway, past a few rooms, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing faintly. The tightness in my chest only grew with every step. Room 307. When we reached the door, I hesitated, my hand gripping the cold metal of the doorknob. I could hear the steady beep of the heart monitor inside, the soft hum of machines that only seemed to amplify the fear gnawing at my gut. I pushed the door open. The sight of Sophie, lying unconscious in the bed, hit me harder than I expected. She was pale, too pale, her face bruised and swollen. A breathing tube was in place, the only sign of life other than the faint rise and fall of her chest. I tried not to let my emotions overwhelm me, but seeing her like that, it shattered something inside me. Evelyn was sitting in the corner, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was unreadable, her eyes distant as she stared at the floor. Her posture was rigid, like she was trying to keep something, some emotion locked inside. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to approach this. Then, my gaze fell to Sophie again, my daughter, my little girl. I could feel the lump in my throat rising, but I swallowed it down. "Evelyn," I said, my voice rough. "What happened?" Evelyn's eyes flicked up to mine, and for the briefest second I saw something that might have been guilt or fear or even panic, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She sighed, running a hand through her hair, avoiding my eyes as she spoke. She fell down the stairs at school. I tried to call you earlier, but you were on that trip, and I didn't know what to do. I thought it was just a bump, but when she didn't wake up, I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. That's not what the nurse said. They said the injuries were more severe than a fall. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, not meeting my gaze. I don't know what they're talking about, Marcus. She's had a tough time lately. School, friends. I didn't think it would get this bad. I stared at her, trying to process her words, but my mind was clouded with doubt. Something didn't add up. The bruises on Sophie's face didn't look like a simple fall. And the sedative the doctor mentioned, it all pointed to something more. Jonah, who had been standing quietly behind me, spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Marcus, I think we need to talk to the doctor. Get some answers." I nodded, barely registering Jonah's words as I approached Sophie's bed. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Her skin felt cold under my fingers, and it hit me harder than I was prepared for. "Sophie," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Come on, sweetheart, wake up, please." But there was no response. Just the sound of the machines around her, steady and mechanical. I stood there for a long moment, holding her hand, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in my chest. Jonah gave me a gentle tap on the shoulder, his expression somber. "I'll go talk to the doctor, Marcus. You need to stay here with her." I nodded, barely hearing him as he left the room. My attention was completely focused on Sophie. I needed to stay strong for her, but with every passing second, the weight of the situation crushed me further. And as the door to the room closed behind Jonah, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't just an accident. Sophie wasn't in that bed because of a fall. This was something much darker. The minutes dragged on, but no answers came. I sat beside Sophie's bed, holding her hand, but my mind kept racing, trying to piece together what had happened. The coldness in her skin, the bruises on her face, the sedative, it didn't make sense. If this was just an accident, why was there so much more to it? Jonah returned a little while later, his face tight, his eyes shadowed with concern. He didn't need to say a word for me to know that he had learned something important. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing at Evelyn, who hadn't moved from her seat across the room. Her arms were still crossed, her eyes distant. Evelyn looked up at the two of us, her face unreadable. "What's going on? What did the doctor say?" Jonah crossed his arms, his eyes locking with mine for a brief moment. "We're getting more details. Sophie's injuries aren't consistent with a fall. The doctor said they look like they were inflicted, not accidental. They think someone might have been trying to cover it up." Evelyn stiffened in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying? That this was intentional? You think Sophie was hurt on purpose?" I felt my pulse quicken. I had hoped for answers, but this wasn't what I had expected. "I don't know yet, Evelyn, but we need to find out. I need to know what happened. Why didn't you tell me anything about this?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For a long, painful moment, she just stared at the floor, biting her lip. Jonah cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. Marcus, I was thinking, maybe we should start looking for clues on our own. We need to understand what's really going on here. I looked at him, my mind still reeling, but he was right. I couldn't just sit here waiting for answers to come to me. I had to do something. Yeah, I muttered. But where do we even start? Jonah's gaze flicked to Evelyn. Her backpack, for one. Evelyn looked up at the mention of it. What does her backpack have to do with any of this? I don't know yet, Jonah said. But if there's something we're missing, maybe a clue, a message, something, it's in there. We've got to check it out. Evelyn seemed to stiffen, her eyes darting to the door. You can't just go through Sophie's things, Marcus. That's invading her privacy. I opened my mouth to argue, but Jonah spoke first. Evelyn, we don't have time for privacy concerns right now. Sophie's unconscious, and we have no idea what's really going on. If you want to help, we need to know what's been happening. We have to look at everything. Her face paled. I saw her eyes flicker, like she was trying to keep herself composed, but I saw it, the slight hesitation, the fear. Something wasn't right. I'll go get it, Jonah said, breaking the silence. He turned and left the room before anyone could protest. I looked at Evelyn, my mind still trying to piece together the broken puzzle in front of me. Evelyn, what's really going on here? You've been so distant with Sophie lately. Why? She didn't meet my eyes, her gaze shifting uncomfortably as she let out a sigh. It's just, things have been tough, Marcus. You don't understand. Sophie, she's been different. Different? I asked, frustration beginning to bubble up inside me. What do you mean? You're her mother. You're supposed to be there for her. She's our daughter. Evelyn shook her head. I know, but you don't see it, Marcus. You're always working. You don't know what she's been going through. She's been hiding things from me. I tried to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. And now, look where we are. I stared at her, a feeling of unease settling in my chest. What things? What's been going on with Sophie? Why didn't you tell me anything? Evelyn's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. She's been acting out, at school, with her friends. I don't know the details, but I think she's been involved with some bad people. People who could hurt her. I froze, processing her words. What are you talking about? What people? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you, she said quickly, her voice wavering. I thought it was just a phase. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I just didn't know what to do. Jonah returned at that moment, holding Sophie's backpack in his hands. He handed it to me silently, and I took it from him, a knot forming in my stomach. I turned to Evelyn, my voice low but firm. You should have told me. We could have figured this out together. She didn't respond. She just looked away, her face flushed with guilt. I sat down on the edge of Sophie's bed, my hands shaking as I unzipped the backpack. Inside, I found a few notebooks, some school supplies, and her phone. I hesitated before pulling the phone out of the bag. It was a shot in the dark, but something told me it could hold answers. Jonah stood beside me, his eyes scanning the room as I powered the phone on. It lit up with a lock screen I didn't recognize. Sophie's passcode. I stared at the phone for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence. You're really going through her things, Marcus? Do you really think this is going to help? I looked up at her, my frustration reaching a boiling point. I don't know what's going on, Evelyn, but I need to know. I need to find out what happened to our daughter. I unlocked the phone, and as soon as the screen opened, a text message caught my eye. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "He knows. Mom said we'd be safe." My heart skipped a beat. I showed the screen to Jonah, who stared at it for a moment before looking at me. This isn't just about Sophie anymore, is it? He said quietly. I nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. It wasn't just Sophie who was in danger. There was something much bigger going on, and Evelyn had been hiding it from me all along. Evelyn, I said slowly, turning to face her. What the hell is going on here? The words I had just read from Sophie's phone echoed in my mind like a bad dream. He knows. Mom said we'd be safe. It felt like the room was closing in around me. The knot in my stomach tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked from the phone to Evelyn, my anger and confusion boiling beneath the surface. She had been hiding something from me, and I needed answers. She sat there, her face flushed, her arms trembling in her lap. For a moment, she didn't say anything. I could see the conflict on her face, like she wanted to tell me everything but didn't know where to start. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice low but firm, holding up the phone. "Who's he, Evelyn? What's going on? Why did you say Sophie would be safe?" Her eyes flicked to the phone for a split second, and then she quickly turned her gaze away. I didn't want you to worry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's complicated. I didn't want to involve you in all this." I couldn't believe it. My daughter was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and Evelyn was more concerned with protecting whatever dark secret she was hiding than with telling me the truth. I slammed the phone down on the table, leaning forward, unable to keep my anger in check anymore. "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "My daughter is in the hospital, Evelyn. I have the right to know what's going on. Who are you protecting?" Evelyn's face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't guilt, at least not just guilt. It was something darker, something deeper. She stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning to face me. "It's not just about Sophie. It's about us. All of us," she said, her words hanging in the air between us. "I didn't want you involved because if you knew everything, it could ruin everything." I took a step closer, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my heart racing. "Ruin what, Evelyn? What is going on? You're scaring me." She paused, her back to me, her shoulders tense as if she was fighting an internal battle. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice quiet, but filled with something that sounded like regret. "It's Victor. He's been coming around for a while. He's dangerous, Marcus. I thought I could control it, but I was wrong." My mind went blank for a moment. "Victor?" I repeated, trying to process her words. "Who is Victor? And why would you keep something like this from me?" Evelyn closed her eyes, her face tightening as though she had just relived a memory she'd rather forget. "Victor is someone I've known for a long time. He's not who he says he is. He's dangerous, Marcus. He's been pressuring me into things, into doing things I never thought I would do." A cold wave of realization hit me. "You've been involved with him? You've been seeing him behind my back?" My voice shook, disbelief and anger mixing. "This is what you've been hiding from me all this time? This is what you've been keeping from Sophie too?" Evelyn flinched, as though my words had physically struck her. She quickly wiped her eyes, but I saw the shame in her face, the guilt that she couldn't hide any longer. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want you to find out like this. I never wanted this to touch our family," she said, her voice breaking. "But Victor, he's been blackmailing me. He has information, things I'm not proud of, things I thought were behind me." "Blackmail?" I repeated. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't want to do it, Marcus," she said, her voice shaky now. "I never thought it would go this far. But he said if I didn't help him, if I didn't do what he asked, he'd destroy everything. He promised to take everything away from us." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "So, you've been helping him with something? What, exactly? What's going on, Evelyn? What does he want?" She glanced nervously at the door, as though she were afraid someone might overhear. She lowered her voice, speaking almost in a whisper now. "He's been trying to get close to Sophie, to manipulate her, and I didn't know how to stop him." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What? What are you saying? You let him near Sophie?" "I tried to keep her away from him," she said quickly, her hands trembling. "But he's got a way of getting to people, of making them believe things. He's been threatening me, Marcus, telling me if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd hurt Sophie. He knows about the life insurance policy, the one I've got on you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I gasped. "What life insurance policy? Why would he know about that?" Evelyn didn't look at me as she spoke. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was trying to protect you, protect Sophie, but I didn't know how to fight back. Victor told me if I didn't help him, if I didn't do what he asked, he'd make sure you never saw Sophie again. He said he could frame you, make it look like you were the one abusing her, and then the insurance money would go to him." I staggered back, unable to process everything she had just said. "You've been helping him?" My voice trembled. "You've been planning this?" "I never wanted it to get this far," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I thought I could get out. I thought I could protect you both. But I couldn't. And now, Sophie, She's caught in the middle of it. The weight of her words hit me like a freight train, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The bruises, the sedative, the strange behavior, Sophie's terror. This was never an accident. This was deliberate. Evelyn had been dragged into something far darker than I had ever imagined, and I had no idea how deep it went. My heart hammered in my chest as I took in everything she had told me. She had been hiding it from me, lying to my face, all while she let Victor destroy everything. Destroy her daughter. And now Sophie was lying in that bed, unconscious, her life upended by the choices Evelyn had made. The silence in the room was suffocating. The truth was out, but I still didn't know where to go from here. I turned to Jonah, who had been standing by quietly, his face a mirror of my own shock. He didn't need to say anything. His expression said it all. Victor, the life insurance, the lies. It was all connected. But how much of this was Evelyn's doing? How much had she been forced into? Marcus? Evelyn's voice broke through the silence. I never meant for any of this to happen. I shook my head, my chest tightening. This isn't over, Evelyn. We need to stop him, for Sophie's sake, for all our sakes. The room felt colder now. The fight had only just begun. But one thing was clear. Evelyn had just opened the door to a nightmare I wasn't sure I could walk away from. The hours dragged by as I sat in the sterile hospital room, my thoughts spinning. Evelyn had left to get some air, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as I sat alone beside Sophie, watching her steady rise and fall of breath. The sound of the machines was oddly soothing in the midst of this chaos, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. Jonah had gone off to gather more information. There were calls to make, people to talk to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Every minute that ticked by felt like it brought us closer to something ugly and far more dangerous than I'd realized. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a groan, weak but unmistakable. I snapped my head to Sophie's bed, my heart jumping in my chest. Her fingers twitched slightly, and her eyelids fluttered before they opened slowly, revealing her hazy, unfocused eyes. "Sophie?" I whispered, leaning in closer. "Sweetheart?" She blinked a few times, her eyes struggling to focus as they moved slowly toward me. It was clear that she was disoriented, confused. But then, after a few long seconds, recognition flickered in her gaze. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it felt like a lifeline to me. "Dad, what happened?" Tears pricked at my eyes, but I swallowed them down. "You're okay, Soph. You're safe now." My hand reached for hers, gripping it tightly. "You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay. I'm here." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. She just stared at me, her face pale and strained. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to make you worry." I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't do anything, Sophie. You didn't make me worry. I'm just glad you're awake." She closed her eyes briefly, letting out a long, shaky breath. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know what's happening, Dad. It's all my fault." I froze, my heart sinking as I looked at her. "What do you mean, Sophie? What happened? You're not to blame for any of this. We're going to figure it all out together." But Sophie's eyes were wide with fear, and there was something deeper, something darker, lurking in the way she looked at me. I could feel the tension in her body, like she was holding something back, something she wasn't sure she could say. "I don't want you to be mad at me, Dad. I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Sophie's voice cracked on the last word, and her gaze dropped to her hands, where she wrung them together nervously. "Sophie, you're not making any sense," I said gently, my voice quiet but insistent. "Tell me what happened. Whatever it is, we'll fix it. But you have to tell me the truth." She swallowed hard, her throat visibly tightening, and for a long moment, she seemed to battle with herself, like she was trying to gather the courage to say whatever was weighing on her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It was Mom. She's been seeing someone, Dad. Someone bad." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, full of fear. "His name's Victor." The name hit me like a slap, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Victor. I had heard Evelyn mention him before, in passing, but I had never suspected anything serious. Now, the pieces were starting to fall into place. "Victor?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What about him, Sophie? What's going on? Sophie closed her eyes as though bracing herself. He's been making Mom do things, bad things. He's been threatening her. And he said he could make things go away if she did what he wanted. He promised he wouldn't hurt us, but I think he's been lying. I leaned in closer, desperate for clarity. Sophie, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? But you need to tell me everything. What has he been making her do? How is he involved in this? You can't keep anything from me, sweetheart. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, and her voice trembled as she spoke again. He's been coming around for months. I tried to tell Mom that something was off, but she wouldn't listen. She said it was just business, but it wasn't. I overheard them talking, Dad. He's been threatening her. He told her that if she didn't do what he said, he'd make you look like the bad guy. He said he could set you up, make it look like you were hurting me. And Mom, she didn't know what to do. I don't think she really wanted to go along with it, but she did. She promised him she would. My heart dropped into my stomach. The weight of what Sophie was telling me was unbearable. I had been right. This wasn't an accident. This was something much worse. Victor threatened Mom with me? My voice was barely a whisper as the realization hit me. What else, Sophie? What did he want from her? Sophie bit her lip, clearly struggling to get the words out. He wanted her to lie about you. He said he'd make you look like a monster, like you'd been hurting me for years, and then he'd get all the money. He knew about the life insurance policy, Dad. He said it was the only way for him to get what he wanted. My chest constricted painfully as the pieces clicked into place. The bruises on Sophie's body, the sedative the doctor had found in her system, the odd behavior. I could finally see the full picture. It wasn't just Evelyn who had been dragged into this mess. She had involved Sophie, using her as leverage in some twisted scheme to take everything from me. My hands tightened around Sophie's as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I had to stay calm for her. She needed me to be strong. I'm so sorry, Sophie, I said softly, my voice breaking despite myself. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. We're going to make sure Victor doesn't hurt you again, okay? I promise. Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I couldn't help but pull her into a tight hug. The weight of everything was suffocating, but in that moment, all I could think about was her, my daughter. She had just told me the truth, the whole ugly truth, and now it was time for me to fix it. We're going to get through this, Soph. I'm going to make sure of it. She clung to me, her sobs muffled against my shoulder, but as I held her, a cold fury began to burn inside me. I had no idea what Evelyn had been involved in, but whatever Victor had planned, it was over now. The truth was out, and justice was coming for him. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Sophie had finally drifted off to sleep, her face still bruised but looking more peaceful than she had in the last few hours. I sat in the chair beside her bed, staring at the floor, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Jonah and Tara were both on their phones, working behind the scenes to gather the information we needed. Tara, my older sister, had arrived shortly after Sophie woke up, her face set in a grim expression as she'd listened to Sophie's confession. She hadn't said much, but the look in her eyes said everything. She was in this with me, no questions asked. I've been going through everything, Marcus, Jonah said as he stepped into the room, pulling me from my thoughts. He looked exhausted, but determined. I've made a few calls, looked up some things on Victor. He's not exactly who he says he is. I stood up, my mind still spinning with the revelations from earlier. What did you find? I asked. Jonah pulled out his phone, tapping a few times before handing it to me. Victor's real name is Victor Hollis. He's got a criminal record. Nothing major, but enough to raise some serious red flags. He's been in and out of prison for small-time fraud and assault charges. I skimmed through the information Jonah had pulled up. So he's not just some businessman like Evelyn said, I muttered. Jonah shook his head. I dug deeper into his financials too. There's a pattern of shady dealings, mainly with people looking to invest in his business ventures. But I couldn't find anything directly linking him to Evelyn. Not yet anyway. I stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together in a way I hadn't expected. So, he's been using her, manipulating her into helping him. And now, he's gone after Sophie. I can't believe she kept this from me, Jonah. How could she keep something like this a secret? Tara, who had been quiet until now, let out a long breath. Because she's scared, Marcus. She's been manipulated too. But we can't just keep blaming her. We need to focus on what comes next. She paused, looking at me with a sharp, focused expression. We need to build the case. This isn't going to be easy. I nodded, feeling a sense of cold determination wash over me. You're right. We need to get our hands on everything. Documents, anything that ties Victor to this. We need to prove that he's the one pulling the strings here. Tara's eyes narrowed. I'll call some people I know, get us some leads. But, Marcus, we can't do this alone. We need a lawyer, someone who can help us navigate this. I had already been thinking about that. We couldn't afford to make a single mistake. I know just the guy. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Who? Grant Pierce, I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. He's one of the best, a real pit bull when it comes to cases like this. He's helped me out before. We can't take any chances. I could see Tara's approval in her eyes. Good choice. We'll need someone with experience, especially if this goes to court. I took a deep breath, my fingers running through my hair. What about Evelyn? She's the key to everything. If we can get her to talk, Tara cut me off. She won't, Marcus. She's too scared of Victor, and if we push her too hard, she'll just dig in and shut down. I nodded, my frustration building again. I don't care. She's my wife, Tara. This is my family. I'm not going to let some guy like Victor tear everything apart. I don't care how scared she is. Jonah put a hand on my shoulder, his voice quiet but firm. We'll get to her. But we need to be smart. If we can't get Evelyn to talk, we'll find another way. We're not walking into this blind, Marcus. We need to control the narrative. I sighed, feeling the weight of everything bearing down on me. But Jonah was right. We had to be smart, strategic. There was no room for mistakes, not when Sophie's safety and Evelyn's freedom were on the line. All right, I said, standing straighter, my jaw clenched. Let's get to work. Tara, start making those calls. Jonah, help me get everything on Victor. I'm going to talk to Grant Pierce tomorrow. We'll need him ready to go once we have everything we need. Tara nodded and stepped out of the room, pulling her phone from her pocket. Jonah lingered for a moment longer, his eyes searching mine. You okay, man? He asked quietly. I turned back to Sophie, her pale face still framed by the machines keeping her alive. I'll be fine once I make sure Victor pays for what he's done, I said, my voice low but full of conviction. Jonah gave a curt nod. I'll do what I can to help with that. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with it. I couldn't help the fire that was starting to build inside me. The pieces of this twisted puzzle were starting to come together, and I knew exactly what I had to do. And this time, no one was going to stop me. A few hours later, I found myself in my truck, heading toward Grant Pierce's office. As the city skyline stretched out in front of me, I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But I also knew one thing for certain. I was going to do whatever it took to make sure Sophie was safe, and that Victor and anyone else who had hurt my family would pay the price. The calm before the storm was over, and now it was time for battle. The courtroom was packed, but to me, it felt like the world had narrowed down to the three people who mattered: me, Evelyn, and Victor. I stood beside Grant Pierce, my lawyer, at the front of the courtroom, watching as the proceedings began to unfold. The air was thick with tension. I could feel the weight of the case pressing down on me, the years of lies and betrayal now being dragged into the light. It felt surreal to be here, sitting in judgment of a life I thought I knew, watching everything crumble. Grant Pierce was calm, collected, and unflinching. He had a sharp suit on, the kind of polished look that screamed authority. The man knew his craft, and I could tell he was ready to go to war. He'd been with me every step of the way in preparing for this day. I trusted him, and right now, I needed to. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. This is the case of Marcus Brandt versus Evelyn Brandt, and the charges involving Victor Hollis, she said, her voice booming through the room. We will hear opening statements. I glanced over at Evelyn, sitting on the other side of the room. Her face was pale, her hands wringing in her lap as she avoided looking at me. She didn't look like the woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew. She looked scared, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if that fear was because of what was happening in the courtroom or because of what she had done. Victor, on the other hand, sat across from Evelyn, his posture stiff, his gaze hard. He wore an arrogant smile that sent a shiver down my spine. He knew what he was capable of, and now it seemed he was determined to act like he was untouchable. Grant stood up first, his presence commanding the room's attention. He faced the judge, and his voice rang clear and confident. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Marcus Brandt, is here today because his wife, Evelyn Brandt, has conspired with a man named Victor Hollis to frame him for crimes he did not commit, Grant began. We are not here simply because of a dispute between a husband and wife. No, what we're dealing with is a deliberate attempt to ruin an innocent man's life for personal gain. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my eyes fixed on Grant, his words steadying me. I had to stay strong. I had to stay focused. Grant continued. Mr. Hollis has used manipulation and threats to coerce Mrs. Brandt into fabricating accusations of abuse against her husband. And worse, he has involved their daughter, Sophie Brandt, in his scheme. We have proof of Mr. Hollis's involvement, financial records, texts, and testimony from witnesses, all of which clearly point to the elaborate and cruel conspiracy he has orchestrated. Grant's eyes shifted toward Victor, and I could see the disdain in his gaze. This man, Victor Hollis, has a criminal history, including charges of fraud, assault, and blackmail. He preyed on the weakness of Mrs. Brandt, using fear and threats to manipulate her into agreeing to his plan. But let me be clear, Your Honor. This is not about a broken marriage. This is about a man who used that marriage to exploit the Brandt family for his own gain. Victor's lawyer, a slick man with a practiced smile, stood up immediately to counter Grant's statement. Objection, Your Honor, he said smoothly. These are wild accusations based on nothing but circumstantial evidence. My client, Mr. Hollis, denies any involvement in any criminal activity. He is here today because of a fabricated narrative presented by Mr. Brandt's lawyer. The judge nodded, but I could see she was already starting to form her opinion. She didn't buy Victor's lawyer's argument, not for a second. The judge glanced over at the prosecutor, who stood silently, not interrupting, and then back at us. We will proceed with the presentation of evidence. Mr. Pierce, you may continue. Grant nodded and turned to me briefly. His eyes were calm, but his message was clear. We're going to win this. After a tense moment, he began presenting the evidence. Financial transactions, texts from Victor threatening Evelyn, and emails that clearly showed his manipulation. We even had the recorded phone call between Evelyn and Victor, where he discussed framing me for abuse, all of it carefully placed before the court, like pieces of a puzzle that, once fitted together, would reveal the full picture of Victor's scheme. Then came Sophie's statement. I had never imagined it would come to this, my own daughter testifying against Evelyn and Victor. But the reality hit me like a brick. Sophie had been so brave, her face pale as she recounted everything to the police. Her words were unwavering as she described how Victor had manipulated Evelyn, how she overheard their conversations, and how Evelyn had allowed all of it to happen. Mom said we had to be quiet, Sophie had told me when she first woke up. She said if we just stayed quiet, we'd be safe. But I don't want to be quiet anymore. I want him to be stopped. It hurt to hear Sophie say those words, but I knew it was the right thing to do. She was the key to everything. Her bravery had changed everything, and now it was time for her to stand up for herself, for me, and for the truth. Your Honor, Grant said, turning back to the judge. We also have testimony from Sophie Brandt, who has confirmed that she overheard conversations between Mrs. Brandt and Mr. Hollis. Sophie's testimony is key in this case. She will testify that Mr. Hollis not only manipulated her mother, but also attempted to manipulate her. We will also prove that Mrs. Brandt was complicit in this scheme. Evelyn's head snapped up at the mention of Sophie, and her eyes flicked nervously between me and Grant. For the first time since this nightmare had started, I saw real fear in her eyes. She was scared of the truth coming out. But it was too late. I turned my gaze toward Victor, his arrogant smile now faltering. He knew the walls were closing in, and I saw him shift in his seat, his fingers gripping the edge of the table, as though trying to hold on to some last vestige of control. Grant's voice rang out again, this time louder, more confident. And we have proof that Mr. Hollis has used his criminal past to manipulate and blackmail Mrs. Brandt. These are not the actions of an innocent man. This is a man who has ruined lives for his own gain, and we are here today to make sure that he pays for it. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, just a little. It wasn't over yet, but the case was coming together. Evelyn and Victor's web of lies was finally unraveling. I could hear the murmurs in the courtroom as Grant's argument hit home, and I knew we had them. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth was coming out. But even though the victory seemed close, I knew this wasn't over yet. There was still a long road ahead of us, a battle I had to win for Sophie's sake, for the sake of everything I had fought for. The judge nodded, signaling for a short recess. Grant turned to me, his expression serious. "We've got them on the ropes, Marcus. We just need to keep pushing, but we're winning this." I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Resolve. And I knew that, together, we were going to make sure Evelyn and Victor paid for what they'd done. And when the dust settled, I would finally get my daughter back. The war was far from over, but we were closer than ever to winning. The trial had been dragging on for days, each moment feeling like an eternity. But as the judge's gavel slammed down, signaling the end of arguments, I felt a surge of relief mixed with dread. The moment of truth had finally arrived. Victor Hollis sat across from me, his smug grin now replaced by the sharp tension in his jaw. He was no longer the confident man who had strutted into the courtroom at the beginning of the trial. Now, he looked desperate, like he knew the walls were closing in. He shot glances at his lawyer, hoping for a lifeline that wasn't coming. Evelyn was beside me, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She hadn't said much throughout the trial, and I could see the fear in her body language. She was the one who had dragged all of us into this mess, and now she was facing the consequences. I turned to Grant Pierce, who stood beside me, his posture relaxed but sharp. He had been methodical, careful, laying out every single detail, each piece of evidence that painted a clear picture of the web of lies and manipulation that had been woven around our family. But as the closing statements began, I knew that we had already won. The judge, a woman who had seen her fair share of cases, looked down at the documents in front of her and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "We have heard enough, and the evidence presented has made it clear that Victor Hollis, in collaboration with Mrs. Evelyn Brandt, conspired to defraud Mr. Marcus Brandt, frame him for abuse, and manipulate their daughter, Sophie Brandt, into becoming part of their scheme. I have no doubt that these actions were not only illegal, but malicious in intent." I felt a strange, bittersweet satisfaction at her words. It was done. The truth had been told. The lies had been exposed. But the cost of it, the cost to our family, was still too high for me to fully grasp. The judge paused, looking over at Victor, who had grown unnervingly still in his seat. I saw his lawyer shift nervously, and the faint tremor in Victor's hands betrayed his calm facade. I knew he was terrified. He should be. As for Evelyn Brandt, the judge continued, her voice unwavering, it is clear that she played a significant role in this conspiracy, even if her involvement was coerced. While I will consider the mitigating circumstances of her actions, the consequences of her choices will not be taken lightly. Evelyn's face twisted, her eyes filling with tears, but she said nothing. It was as if she realized, too late, the magnitude of what she had done. There would be no escape for her now. The court will reconvene shortly to deliberate sentencing for both parties. The gavel came down again, and the room erupted into whispers. I could barely hear the conversation swirling around me as my focus remained fixed on the judge, Victor, and Evelyn. The trial had been long, but the hardest part, the waiting, was still ahead. Grant leaned in and whispered, "This is a win, Marcus. It's over. You've got them both." I nodded, but my stomach was still in knots. It was over, yes, but there was still the lingering feeling of betrayal. It had come from Evelyn, the person I trusted most. I had married her. I had built a life with her. And yet, she had been part of the plan to destroy everything. Victor's lawyer stood up to approach him, but Victor remained motionless, his eyes locked on the floor. He knew what was coming. The charges were too clear, and the evidence too strong. He was going down for this. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just a courtroom battle that was coming to an end. It was the end of a chapter in my life. The life I had built with Evelyn, the one I thought was full of trust and love, had turned out to be built on lies. And now I was left standing in the ruins, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces for Sophie's sake. Jonah and Tara stood behind me, their support unwavering. I hadn't asked them to be here, but they'd both insisted. I needed them, whether I liked it or not. They were family, and they'd stood by me through every dark moment of this nightmare. I turned to Jonah. "Do you think they'll do time?" I asked quietly, not able to keep the edge out of my voice. Jonah crossed his arms, a thoughtful expression on his face. "They're both guilty, no question, Victor's looking at some serious time for fraud, blackmail, and conspiracy. Evelyn's role will be seen as a lesser charge, but she'll still face charges for child endangerment and conspiracy. I'd say they're both screwed. I glanced at Evelyn again. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking small and broken. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Not after everything she had put Sophie through, everything she had put me through. We've got what we need. Now we wait for sentencing, Grant said, his voice calm but with a clear finality. It's in the judge's hands now. The final decision came a week later, and the courtroom was filled with tense anticipation. The judge took her seat, and the room fell silent. After reviewing the evidence and the circumstances surrounding both defendants, the judge began. I hereby sentence Victor Hollis to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. His actions in manipulating and attempting to frame an innocent man will not go unpunished. I felt a small flicker of relief. The justice I had been waiting for had come. But it wasn't enough. Nothing could truly undo what had been done. As for Evelyn Brandt, the judge continued, her gaze steady as it moved over to Evelyn, you will serve a sentence of 5 years under house arrest for your involvement in this conspiracy and your role in endangering your child. While it is clear that your actions were heavily influenced by Mr. Hollis, your decisions were still damaging to your family and will have consequences. I watched as Evelyn's face crumpled. She let out a choked sob, but there were no words. She was being punished for her role in everything. Her lies, her betrayal, her choices. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it was justice. The court was adjourned, and as I stood to leave, I turned to look at Sophie, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room. She was watching me, her eyes tired but strong. She had been through hell, but she was still standing. And that was what mattered. She was my daughter, and no matter what had happened, I would always protect her. Jonah and Tara followed me out of the courtroom, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't over. There would be plenty of healing left to do, plenty of wounds to mend. But for the first time, I felt like the fight had been worth it. We had won. 6 months had passed since the trial, and though the scars would never fully fade, the weight that had been dragging me down for so long was finally starting to lift. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the small town of Pine Haven. Jonah and Sheriff Cole Denton sat beside me on the porch of my house, the same porch where I'd spent countless evenings staring out at the horizon, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Now, the air felt different, lighter, freer. There was a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Jonah kicked back in his chair, sipping from a bottle of beer. "You sure you're okay, man?" he asked, eyeing me as if he could still see the weight of it all in my face. He was always the observant one. I leaned back, my elbows resting on the arms of the porch chair, my hands casually clasped together. "Yeah," I said, the word feeling more solid with each passing day. "I think I am." It hadn't been easy. Sophie had gone through therapy, and though the wounds from what she had experienced would take time to heal, she was doing better. We were working through it, rebuilding our relationship, our family. There were days when it felt like things were finally getting back to normal, but then there were days when the reality of everything would hit me all over again, like a punch to the gut. But I was learning to move forward, learning to live without constantly looking over my shoulder. "Good to hear," Jonah said, nodding. "You've been through hell, man. You deserve this." Sheriff Denton, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke up. "I still don't know how you pulled it off, Marcus. You turned the tables on them, got everything you needed. Hell, you even got that bastard Victor behind bars." He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "You made it look easy." I smiled, a small but genuine smile. It wasn't easy, but I wasn't going to stop until I had all the pieces. Until I could look Sophie in the eye and tell her it was over. Cole leaned forward in his chair, taking a long draw from his own beer before setting it down on the porch table. "You did good. You protected her, and you protected yourself. That's something to be proud of." I looked out at the fields stretching beyond my property, the same fields I'd looked at for years, only now they seemed a little more open, a little more welcoming. I don't know if I'll ever truly get over everything that happened, the lies, the betrayal, but we're moving forward, and that's all I can ask for. Jonah grinned, glancing at me. "You're tougher than you think, man." I shook my head, but there was a softness to the motion. "Maybe, but I had a lot of help along the way." Sheriff Denton gave me a knowing look. That's the thing, Marcus. You don't have to do it alone. You've got people who've got your back. It was strange hearing that out loud. For so long, I'd carried the weight of everything on my own, burying myself in work, trying to hold it all together by myself. But Jonah, Tara, even Cole, they had been there when it mattered. They'd been there when I needed someone to lean on, when I thought I was about to fall apart. You're right, I said, finally letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I've got a good team. Maybe for the first time, I'm not so alone. We all sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the hum of cicadas in the warm evening air mixing with the soft clink of bottles. It was a kind of peace I hadn't known I could have. After everything that had happened, after all the chaos and heartbreak, this was what I had left. A chance to rebuild, to reclaim some semblance of a life I thought I might never get back. I leaned forward, looking down at my hands, thinking about Sophie and the future we still had ahead of us. You know, she's been talking about studying law, I said, breaking the silence. She wants to help people, maybe even become a lawyer. Jonah raised an eyebrow. A lawyer? Damn, guess you've got a little lawyer in the family after all. I chuckled. I never thought I'd see the day, but she's got a lot of fight in her. I think she'll do great things. Cole smiled, clearly proud of the young woman Sophie was becoming. She's got her head on straight, that's for sure. You've done good, Marcus. You've raised her right. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. I'm just trying to be the kind of father she deserves. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, leaving the sky in shades of purple and orange. The last remnants of light faded into the night as I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. To new beginnings, Jonah said, lifting his bottle. I raised mine. To new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because I knew no matter what came next, I wouldn't face it alone.